Today we're going to talk about the manifestor energy type in human design. And if you haven't already, please feel free to check out my other videos and learn more about human design and how you can use it in your life. Because when you know more about yourself, life just gets easier. So let's have a look at the manifestor and what it means to be a manifestor energy type. It's not hard to see from this chart that a manifestor is a pretty rare type, and in fact is the second rarest type of all the human design energy types. And when you find out what a manifestor does, you'll understand why this is just exactly the way it should be. So what makes a manifestor a manifestor? For one thing, they're always going to have an open sacral, or they won't have a red square at the bottom of the body graph like you see in the generator and manifesting generator charts. But unlike generator types that always have a red square and easily can be identified, manifestors are one of the other three energy types, which means you have to do a little bit more investigation to figure out which type is which based on a body graph. So let's take a quick look at the three energy types that do not have a defined sacral. With the charts side by side, it's pretty easy to see that the reflector is the reflector because they don't have any defined centers at all. But when you look at a projector and a manifestor side by side, they look quite similar. So what's the difference? Well, it all comes down to a motor. And what makes a manifestor is a motor to the throat. And if you don't have a motor to the throat, you're going to be a projector. So what does it mean to have a motor to the throat? Well, let's find out. If you watched any of my other videos, you might have seen this diagram already. But for those who haven't, here's a brief description of what a motor is and how it works in a human design body graph. In human design, there are 4 motors in the body graph, the strongest of which is the sacral motor. And the weakest motor is the root motor because that's the furthest away from the throat. And the name of the game in human design is to get energy to the throat. And when you have a motor to the throat, it means the energy gets to the throat much faster. And since the throat is considered the center for manifestation, or the place where dreams become reality, then getting energy to the throat, especially by a motor which is stronger and more powerful, can mean that things happen easier and quicker for some types than others. That doesn't mean that other energy types are at a disadvantage. It just means that the energy getting to the throat isn't as consistent as it would be with someone who has a direct motor to the throat. In other words, someone with a motor to the throat doesn't necessarily need people to make things happen, and somebody without a motor to the throat needs other people's energy to help them complete the channel so that they too can have a motor to the throat. And when I say needing other people's energy, it doesn't necessarily mean you need a big group of friends. It can mean just going out to a coffee shop and getting your work done so you can get the energy that you need to complete the channel so that you have a motor to the throat. And another way to get a motor to the throat that you can experiment with is what's called transits, or when certain planets hit certain parts of the astrological chart or gates of the body graph. And when they land on these particular gates, the theory is that the energy of that particular gate becomes available to everyone. And one more thing about having a motorized throat that both manifesting generators and manifestors have is the ability to have their voices heard by those around them, meaning that when they speak, they get noticed more. All the other types who do not have a motorized throat may find it more difficult to be heard when they're speaking. For instance, if you're in a shop and you need someone's help and you go to the counter to ask for help, but the person who's working there has their back to you, a manifestor or a manifesting generator will be heard much quicker than somebody with a non-motorized voice would be. And it's all about the speed of the energy to the throat. So now that we know a little bit more about motors, let's have a look at what makes a manifestor a manifestor. The first thing you may notice is the manifestor will always have a white square at the bottom or what's called an open sacral. And the other thing a manifestor has to have is a motor to the throat. And it doesn't really matter which motor gets to the throat as long as one of them gets to the throat. So if someone has an open sacral and a motor to the throat, then that means they're a manifestor. And because there's a motor to the throat, that means the throat will always be defined, or the throat will always be brown, because anything that's undefined is white and anything that is defined is a color that is specific to that center. Now that we know a little bit about a manifestor, let's have a look at some charts. If you look at this chart for Katie Holmes, you'll notice that she has 2 motors defined and also a defined throat. All things could happen with a projector as well as a manifestor, but what makes it different and what makes Katie Holmes a manifestor is a defined channel 1222 that goes directly to the throat from the emotional center, which gives her a motorized throat. And because her sacral is open or undefined, that makes her a manifestor. When we look at Jennifer Lawrence's chart, we notice that she has 3 motors defined. She has the will center, the emotional center, and also the root defined, which means she has 3 out of 4 motors defined. In fact, all the motors she can have defined and still remain a manifestor. Instead of having the emotional center motorizing the throat, she has the will center motorizing the throat through the channel 4521. And as I said before, projectors can have 3 out of 4 motors defined as well, but the only difference is that they won't have a motorized throat like a manifestor. So now that we know what a body graph for a manifestor looks like, let's talk a little bit more about what it means to be a manifestor. And when we talk about having an undefined sacral, what exactly does that mean for a manifestor? Well, it means that the energy that goes to the sacral, or any undefined center for that matter, is more inconsistent than it is with something that is defined. So for instance, generator types have a defined sacral always, which means they always have a constant or ready supply of sacral energy or workforce energy, because the sacral is all about workforce and sex and reproduction and all the things that we do to survive as a human race. So when you have an open sacral, it means this type of energy is more inconsistent or dependent upon the other people that you're with. So for a manifestor or anybody with an open sacral, you could be out in public with a lot of different people, and the energy can be frenetic and busy and give you a lot of energy as well. But once you're out of that energy field and the energy has dissipated, there can be a sudden exhaustion, leaving you feeling depleted. And there's nothing wrong with experiencing energy in a different way as a manifestor. The only thing to keep in mind is to know that this energy is really just coming and going, and it can't be counted on to be available whenever a manifestor wants it to be available, because ultimately a manifestor type has an open sacral, and because the energy is inconsistent, even if they feel like a generator type with a constant battery power of energy, they just don't have it. And this is where manifestors can sometimes slip up, because they try and be like generator types, believing that they have an endless supply of energy. And when this gets to be a pattern, manifestors can actually burn themselves out. So as long as a manifestor knows how their energy works and how they can use it to their advantage, they can continue to create and be in their flow without the risk of burning out. If I was talking about a generator type with a defined sacral and a battery power of energy, I would say that they need to burn their energy all day until they're depleted and fall into sleep at the end of the day. But whenever you have an open sacral, like a manifestor has, that means instead of waiting until you're at the point of exhaustion to get the best quality sleep, a manifestor needs to go to bed when they're not really extremely tired. This way, they can allow the energy that they picked up through the day to dispel so they can have the best sleep possible. And another tip that might help a manifestor get a good sleep is that sleeping alone might be in their best interest. Because if they're sleeping with a generator type, the generator's energy can rev them up and not allow them to get their best sleep. And one more thing about a manifestor energy is that when it comes to sex, it may feel different for every different partner that they have, because the sacral is not just about workforce energy, it's also about sexual reproductive energy, and as such is inconsistent and dependent upon the partner that they're with. A key phrase that describes a manifestor is just do it. And what that means is when a manifestor has an idea or an action plan that they want to put into play, the only thing they need to listen to is their own inner guidance. And because of this, manifestors are considered the initiator for all the other types. Manifestors are not here to wait. They are not here to be told what to do. And because of that, they're unlike all the other types in human design, because all other types have some form of waiting in their design. And that's just not the case for manifestors. Left to their own designs, manifestors can get a lot done. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And the reason why manifestors aren't left alone to do their own thing is because their energy is so fast that they can draw attention from the other types, especially when a manifestor is in what's called the creative flow, which means when they're in the act of making things happen in life. And when they're in the creative flow, they can be moving at the speed of light, lost in the act of manifestation. And since manifestation for a manifestor is all about doing it alone, they don't need anybody else's help. But because humans are very social creatures, more times than not, people ask the manifestor if they need help, or they may interrupt them, ask them questions, and in doing so, they stop the creative flow, and the manifestor can become angry because it feels like getting pulled off a roller coaster before the ride is done. Just by their very nature, manifestors are not here to be team players. They're here to be initiators and leaders. But if they're not a leader, they can be a lone wolf and just do their own thing. But the last thing a manifestor ever wants to be told is what to do. And when they are told what to do, or they're pulled out of their creative flow, a manifestor's response is anger, which is a human design theme for a manifestor. And what do manifestors really want? Well, they want freedom. Freedom to do as they like without anybody telling them what to do, when to do it, or how to do it. They need space to be alone when they want it. By nature and in human design, manifestors don't need energy from other people to get things done. But not needing people doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want to have people around. A manifestor wants a relationship just like anybody else. The only difference with a manifestor is that they need to have a relationship on their own terms. And when people understand that manifestors are here to be their own bosses, to go with their own flow, things go much smoother in life for everyone involved. And when a manifestor is understood, just like anybody else in the world, they'll have the peace to do as they like and not feel guilty or feel like they have to hide what they're doing from anybody else. And in having that freedom to create the world that they want to create, they will fulfill the role that they're here for. This is the end of part 1, but there's still more to learn about a manifestor. And if you're interested, please check out part 2, where we'll discover the best strategy a manifestor can use to get the most fulfillment out of their life. Hope to see you soon.